The fully fictional yet recurring myth of black buying power continues its assault on logic by working to convince the poor that they are poor because of their own poor spending habits, poor financial literacy, and poor work ethic. And in so doing, the myth encourages blame be shifted from those who create poverty to those who must suffer it. Since 2008, I've been trying to convince people of the myth of black buying power. With there now being some renewed focus on black methods of resistance, specifically recent calls to boycott and move money to black banks, the myth has renewed energy. Today, some comrades of mine who work with Sputnik Radio and WPFW 89.3 FM, both in Washington, D.C., invited me to their respective programs to talk about the myth of black buying power.
And one of the goals for this show, and we've been really unpacking some of the myth of black buying power, which is a long conversation that we're going to have for ongoing conversation. But with Voices with Vision, this is a show about revolutionary action. And so we do want to point to not just what economic power isn't, but what economic power is. And so one of the things that folks have been lifting up is the idea of banking black. And so we're going to speak with, B. Doyle Mitchell Jr., who is the president and CEO of Industrial Bank. You know, everyone's been seeing those lists of black banks around the country that's been going around, and Industrial Bank is the DC's black bank. And so we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to go deeper into, Dr. Ball, what you think economic power is. So let's, I believe we have, Mr. Mitchell on the phone. Mr. Mitchell, are you there?
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Thank
Great.
you for having me on the show.
Yeah, thank you for being on.
Now, we've got people listening from all over the world. Can you just give us a little background on the history of Industrial Bank?
Sure. The Industrial Bank was founded by my grandfather and 8 other businessmen in 1934 at the height of the Great Depression at 11th and U Street, Shaw neighborhood in Northwest Washington, D.C. There was a thriving black entertainment, business, and residential community, and there was no bank there. There was a bank, but it closed during the banking holiday, and he saw a need for there to be one to help finance homes and, you know, some cars and businesses. And they raised some capital and got resounding support, and they opened in August of 1934. Grew slow and steadily and profitably until my father took over in the 50s. He ran the bank until he passed away in 1993. At that time, the bank was roughly $150 million in total assets, profitable, very sound, good capital, and I took over at that time at the ripe age of 30. I turned 31 a couple of weeks later, and since then we've expanded to 8 branches, 2 in Prince George's County, Maryland, and we are still profitable. We did not lose any money during the recession. We only repossessed 3 homes since 2008, I believe, and we still have strong capital levels, good regulatory ratings, outstanding CRA rating, and we are a CDFI. We became a CDFI somewhere around 2008, 2009. It's a community development financial institution, and we're still going strong today.
Now, what we've been discussing is black economics, specifically in black economics in this political moment where we're seeing increasing state violence and repression in black communities. And there's been many calls for people to buy black and bank black. I saw a post on Instagram with the hashtag Black Transfer Challenge, where they're calling for folks to go to Industrial Bank all on the same day, July 23rd at 9 a.m., this group HBCU Wall Street, to open accounts with Industrial. Have you seen an increase in in new accounts as a result of this?
Yes, we have. The activity has been phenomenal. It's been exponentially greater than what we normally see on any given day or any given week. We're actually still counting the number of accounts. It's happening so fast and so much, which is a wonderful thing. We're trying to keep up with processing all this activity. So we have seen a lot of activity. We are totally grateful for it. That being said, let me just say this. This is what African Americans should be doing anyway. And there have been a number of efforts over the years that have called for African Americans to, for blacks to support black businesses and support black banks. And we need to do it anyway. And if the shooting stops tomorrow, we need to keep this going. And here's the reason why. We have tremendous spending power, but it does us no good because we spend it outside of our community. The average time that a black dollar stays in the black community is 6 hours. So you get paid on Friday at 5, and all of our money essentially is out of our community by Friday at 11. Once we hit the club, it's gone.
So can I, Mr. Mitchell, if I can chime in, and this is Netflix Freeman. So, given that, so you said this is the reason, what you're outlining is the reason why we should continue to buy black and have our investments in black banks. And you said this would, I guess the implication is they will benefit us as a community. And so let's get to that direct benefit, because, if we look at the class disparities, I mean, I know a lot of people, they don't even have bank accounts, and not because they're being irresponsible, they just don't have the money for it. And so in what ways, I mean, more directly, are there interest-free loans that we could have, or is there grants that the banks and the businesses could make to projects that would have a long-term impact on the most affected, the most poverty-stricken people who really don't have anything to give into banks or anything like that, but that's really the crux of our oppression?
It's a good question. Let me explain. Maggie Anderson wrote a book in 2009 called Our Black Year. I suggest everybody get a copy of it. Every black person ought to have it in America, because what she and her husband did is say, I'm just buying black for an entire year, and they were amazingly successful. It was very difficult, and it required a lot of sacrifice. Sometimes he had to drive farther, sometimes he had to pay a little more, but they did it. It's my black on black business Bible. So everybody should get that. Maggie Anderson, Our Black Year. She wrote this in 2009. In that book, they had Kellogg Business School that reduced to statistics a lot of data that we as African Americans and around this conversation need to be having all the time. So Kellogg Business School determined that we only spend 3% of our income with black businesses. And then what they determined is what happens if we go from 3 to 10. Maggie's quote is 3 to 10, what's your spend? If we only go to 10%, we create 1 million black jobs overnight. Now let that just resonate.
I really want to know how that does that. How does that translate?
Well, we're going to unpack this in a second. We do have to go to a quick break, and we'll be right back with Mr. B. Doyle Mitchell Jr. from Industrial Bank and Dr. Jared Ball from I Mix What I Like. Now, we've got a lot of ideas converging, and so we're really going to have to unpack this in the second half of the show. We'll be right back. You're listening to Voices with Vision.
You're listening to Voice with Vision. My name is Netfa Freeman, and we're in the studio with Dr. Jared Ball of Mix What I Like, and we're speaking. We have on the line Mr. Doyle Mitchell Jr. He's the president and CEO of Industrial Bank.
Yes, B. Doyle Mitchell Jr.
B. Doyle Mitchell Jr. And so you were before we went to break, you were explaining the fact that if we raised our spending power by up to $10 10%, then they would increase the number of jobs in the community.
A million jobs.
And I was actually the question was how, if you could lay out maybe how that would do that.
Well, basically, if we spend more money with black businesses would grow, and when they grow, they would have to hire more people. And the tendency among minorities is to hire people that look like you. And so, if Industrial Bank was twice its size, and we wouldn't necessarily double our workforce, but out of the people that we did hire, I'm sure a vast majority of those would be African American.
Mm.
So, but again, for me, the question, it goes back to this, what I'm calling the myth of black buying power, that one, there isn't this amount of money that I think is often attached as $1 trillion. It doesn't exist in the way that I think people think that it exists when they hear we have $1 trillion. There isn't a pot of $1 trillion that we just choose to spend foolishly. We buy what is available to us, and then. Well, of course, and then of course these numbers are themselves questionable. So, I mean, this notion of adjusting 10%. One, the question is, it's hard particularly for working black people, to find black-owned businesses that will satisfy their consumer needs, especially for regular day-to-day necessities. And
can I jump in? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have to jump in.
Okay.
The trillion, 1.2, 1.3. The trillion is our GDP. It's our income.
That's incorrect. That's incorrect. That's not how those numbers are created, and that's part of what
how they created.
And then if we look at the research behind that number, we see that the number is itself entirely fraudulent.
Right. Now that's key. Get into that, please.
So what I started doing in 2008 is just trying to look more carefully at where this number was coming from, because when you look at the studies that come out all the time from the Economic Policy Institute, or from reported in Socialist Worker, or from the Party for Socialism and Liberation, or the Fairness and Equality, United for a Fair Economy group that produce these reports every year about the state of black America's economy, we see things like the net median household wealth for black America is at most $11,000. The median net worth of a working age woman of color is $5. Black America, the Economic Policy Institute says that black America is in a, quote, permanent recession, meaning that no matter how well the economy is doing, black people, because of how our position in the economy, never do well. So when you look at all these numbers, I'm saying, well, how is it then that we have this $1 trillion? And then a couple of years ago, they came out and said that I think in Native America has $100 billion in buying power. And you're like, well, wait a minute. The average Native American is like on $2 a day. Right. So how is it that they have all this incredible buying power that they're just, again, as we're encouraged to believe, foolishly not spending appropriately? Or because we lack financial literacy is the catchphrase is often used. Mm-hmm. So when I started looking at some of the numbers, I said, you start looking at the reports, and all the reports go back to almost the same report. Initially, it came from the Selig Center, which produced this study several years ago, and continues to produce studies on this. And when you look at how they determine, black buying power or buying power, they did things. The variables include, for instance, black population growth. That the black population is increasing. So therefore, automatically, that means that we have an increased consumer power
that people mistakenly mean is economic strength. Increased job opportunities was what they claim. Now, if we look at the situation for Black America and employment and unemployment or underemployment or long-term unemployment, the numbers don't really bear that out. Or they would say that there's more education coming for Black America, that more education equals more income, more that you can spend, so on and so forth. But my point is, as I read through these, as people will hear them, they're not tied to any actual number or actual amount of money that Black people have. They're all like spurious, vague, My favorite one is that they said only 8.1% of Black America is over the age of 65, at which point at which time is considered a career pinnacle, and at which point wage increase decelerate, whereas whites have 13.5% over 65, meaning that according to this logic, they have a weaker buying power because once you're older, you make less money and you spend less. But of course, the problem here is that Black people die before the age of 65. The life expectancy for Black people is about 66, 67 years old. So we're not living as long. So you can't then say that we're economically stronger because we're dying earlier is really what they're trying to say. It doesn't really compute. Other ones include, Black people, it says here, spend more than non-Blacks on natural gas, electricity, telephone service, and footwear, and a higher proportion of their money on groceries, housing, and women's and girls' clothing. Now, how this generates to actually economic power because we spend more on trinkets or what Fanon might have called the colonial goods that are left for us to purchase doesn't make any sense. And then one of my favorites is they put out in the study in 2008 was that Black home ownership was going to go up. That this was a sign that Black economic strength was increasing, or Black buying power, rather, was increasing, which is, as they would have us believe, is Black economic strength. Then, of course, as we saw with the wipeout of the housing market, et cetera, and the horrible hit that this meant for Black and brown people. And so my point is this $1 trillion is not based on, now, we just had a conversation with the head of the industrial bank here in D.C., who I think is under the misguided assumption, as he said on air, that, well, he was saying, well, wait a minute, our buying power is the extension, is determined by the, as he said, the gross domestic product of Black America. Well, there are a lot of flaws in that. So as he said, well, if I make $100,000 and you make $100,000, well, that means the two of us have $200,000 in spending power. Well, obviously that's not true. Of course, we're dealing with gross numbers. Number one, we're not talking about all the other things that go into this. That anywhere, depending on which studies you look at, working people and Black people in particular spend 70 to 90% of their income on just housing. So that doesn't mean that we have a lot of money then to invest in stock and buy land and all this other stuff. And of course, as a gross number, it's not talking about after taxes. It's not talking about, again, after we So their argument is, well, if we take that gross number and we can then say, well, after you pay all your bills, then you go out and spend whatever it is. Yeah. And then they come up with this $1 trillion number, which, as I'm saying here, is not based on anything real, and it's based on gross numbers of our income, which doesn't really give you an accurate look at anyone's actual economic power. Certainly beyond the ability to be a consumer, which is really all we're talking about. And there's no revolutionary path through consumption. I think famously something about owning means of production is the way it has occurred. Something like that. Indeed.
Owning the means of production. As Zach De La Rocha at Rage Against the Machine said that I always like, he said, I don't want the G-Ride, I want the machines that are making them. And I think that's what it gets into.
So for the purpose of this conversation, what do African Americans not have a lot of income?
Correct. I'm saying that Black Americans do not have. Correct. I'm saying that Black Americans do not have this tremendous amount of income that can be spent in any way that Black people want. A lot of what Black people and all working people do is they spend on what is available to them, and they spend based a lot of it on credit. It's not even based on income because wages have remained flat, and the way that since the 70s, and the way that the corporate capitalist world has adjusted for that is to offer more loans through credit card debt. So that's why you have the average Black household has about $7,000 in credit card debt, which puts them just about the credit card debt is about $4,000 less than what the median net household worth of a Black family is, which is, I think, just about $11,000. So there is not this pot of money that's being spent that would generate this kind of buying power.
But there's a lot of money that goes through our hands. The other part of it, that's the point.
No,
But the other part of that, this point you're raising about going through the hands, is that there aren't the amount of black businesses that can accommodate black consumer needs. Number one, and then the other part of it is that there's no. I think the historical research says much to the opposite. Much like the research that Earl Ofari Hutchinson did back in the '60s, since the '60s, showing that there is no correlation between an increase in black business and black even banks and the collective uplift of black people. So we may create a few more black wealthy individuals, but we're not going to create something that's good for the entire community.
And all of this is not going to help, and so therefore we should not try it. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm not saying not to try it. I'm saying that it's not an answer to the problem that is created by capitalism and primarily by capitalism and its impact on working people. In this case, particularly black working people.
So I can definitely tell you that if we redirect our income to black businesses, and it does take time and effort to find them and help grow them. It's not an easy solution. It doesn't happen overnight. But they are out there, and the more efforts we use to support them, find them, support them, and help them to grow will make a difference in our community. But we're using this as an excuse as to someone who makes $35,000 or $50,000 not to even try to find black businesses or not to even open up an account at a black
No, I'm
bank.
saying don't blame them, because if you're only making $35,000, which is the average, salary of a working person across races, so it's lower for black people actually, and we're talking about communities that are spending upwards of 70, in some cases 90% of their income just on housing. There isn't this, and there isn't leftover money for buying a lot of different things and supporting a lot of different businesses. So that's part of the problem.
Well, I just want